Hello everyone, my name is Holger and this is another video on the WoT Show Theory channel, which is dedicated to analysis and theory crafting about the Wheel of Time TV show. This video is my third update to my first Season 3 prediction video that I released in April of 2024. In this video I'm including all of the information we have received since the teaser trailer, all the way through the recent cast interviews and a new scene from episode 1 shown on British television. I will not repeat all of the predictions from my earlier videos, so if you have not watched them yet, then you'll probably want to watch them before watching this video. But first a spoiler warning. This video does contain spoilers for the complete book series. I recommend that before watching this video, you watch the first 2 seasons of the TV show and read all 14 books, plus the prequel New Spring. Unfortunately, I was not able to make it to London for the Season 3 premiere, so I have not seen episode 1 yet and don't know the content of the episode. Because of that, the content of this video is still speculative, and I'm purposefully releasing it before the global fan event on March 8th. So let's first look at the episode titles of the first 5 episodes that have now been confirmed on the Prime Video website. Based on those, we can also reason what the other 3 titles are. Episode 7 is Golden Eyes, as was reported by WoT Series long ago. Episode 8 has been known to be either A Question of Crimson or He Who Comes with the Dawn. And since A Question of Crimson is now confirmed for episode 2, this means episode 8 is He Who Comes with the Dawn. This leaves episode 6 as The Shadow in the Night. This is exactly the order that I had predicted in my last video, so this is one piece I got right. Let's also look at the descriptions of the first 2 episodes for a moment. For episode 1, the description does not tell us much, because it obviously refers to the Black Arja attack. For episode 2, the description apparently refers to Elida, and it also confirms that Perrin leaves in episode 2, which was another one of my predictions. I look at the other episode descriptions a bit later, in the context of the individual storylines. Next there's this episode 1 scene shown on British ITV of everyone in our group being together on an upper floor balcony of a building. A longer version of this scene was later published on the Amazon Prime Video Press website, and that is the one I'm going to look at here. The commentator on ITV claims that this is Falm, but that is obviously incorrect. The building architecture looks nothing like the buildings in Falm. The location is actually Valon, and the balcony shown here probably belongs to the same building in which we later see our group stay, because the window design in this image looks very similar to the window we saw in other Valon scenes in the teaser and trailer. The extended version of this clip contains the line, "And after what happened today, I don't want any of you near another Aes Sedai," apparently referencing the events in the White Tower earlier in the day. That proves that this scene happens after the cold open in the in-story timeline. This means we're not dealing with any flashbacks or flash-forwards here. So can we narrow it down a bit more? We know that the cold open takes about 15 minutes, and that at the 22-minute mark we already see the boys hanging out in a bar, which probably happens after Moiraine's speech, because at the end of the extended version of this clip we see the boys going downstairs. So it looks like that scene on the balcony happens somewhere between the 15-minute and 22-minute mark. There's not much new information in that balcony scene, except that we see Nynaeve here. Since this scene happens after the cold open, Nynaeve must have left the tower again after giving her testimony, probably right after the fighting in the tower. This suggests that Moiraine probably had told the girls earlier not to return to the tower until the situation with Liandrin and the Black Arja had played out, except of course for Nynaeve, who was needed as a witness. Next I'll start looking at some of the cast interviews, at least those that affect the early part of the season. First about Egwene and her accepted test. In an interview with CG Magazine, Yosha, the actor playing Rand, talked about Egwene going through the arches, but it is not necessarily clear that this happens literally. In an interview with Nerdist, Rafe talked about Egwene's story arc, specifically the introduction of dreaming. From the way he apparently contrasts what happens in the books, where Egwene learns dreaming in the tower, with what happens in the show, it seems that in the show Egwene learns dreaming in a different way. This again hints at Egwene spending the early part of his season outside of the tower. And then there are the instructions that Moiraine gives everyone to not go near another Aes Sedai. So with this information it looks like the reason why the girls do not enter the tower early in the season is apparently not a threat of expulsion, but simply instructions given by Moiraine. Either way, the result is the same. It would explain why we later see Elaine hang out with Avienda and have drinks. This should also apply to Egwene though, and would imply that she does not have her accepted test in the tower. None of that is really absolutely conclusive though, so as far as Egwene's accepted test is concerned, it is still not clear what to believe here. Moving on to Perrin. We already know from the episode 2 description that he does leave in episode 2, and from interviews we also find out why he leaves, and this is a bit of a surprise. In 2 different interviews, Marcus, the actor playing Perrin, states that the reason for leaving the group is not related to any danger to the Two Rivers, but rather because he wants to get away from the fighting, and feels that he does not fit in with the others, probably because he thinks that he does not have any helpful special abilities. This is somewhat understandable considering what Perrin knows at this point. Rand is the Dragon Reborn, Matt is a hero of the Horn, the girls are very strong channelers, and Perrin, well, Perrin is a wolf brother, but at this point Perrin does not know about the wolf dream yet, or the advantages that gives him. He also does not know about his own leadership skills yet. So for him to feel like he does not fit in and has nothing to contribute is understandable. This means that all of the speculations about Galad being the source of information about the White Cloaks going to the Two Rivers is moot. With this change, Perrin does not have to find out about the threat to the Two Rivers, so we don't need any informant. This does somewhat complicate another matter though, and that is the question why Loyal, Bane, Chiat, and Alana also end up in the Two Rivers if there's no expectation of fighting. I'll get back to that a little later when I get to the Two Rivers storyline. Let's move on to Rand, and specifically his Bubble of Evil scene. We now know from an interview with Black Girl Nerds that Yosha is actually playing different versions of Rand here, with different personalities, and that one of them is apparently somewhat sadistic, and that is the one attacking Egwene in this scene, causing Egwene to become frightened. We still don't know whether this fight is in episode 1 or 2. We are also going to see the process of Rand becoming separated from the other kids, and it appears to be driven primarily by Moraine, who sees the other kids as an obstacle for Rand to fulfill his prophecies. Moraine apparently even goes so far as entering some kind of temporary alliance with Lanfear to pull Rand away from the other kids. This is quite remarkable, but I think the reason why the writers put this into the story is at least in part because of out-of-story considerations. In Season 2, from about the midpoint on, once we found out how powerful Lanfear is, and that she apparently does not like Moraine, there was the question why she does not simply kill Moraine. Lanfear would easily have been able to do so. The answer comes in episode 8, when we find out that Lanfear still needed Moraine for the Dragon Banner Weave. The problem that the show now has in Season 3 is that there's no apparent reason why Lanfear still needs Moraine, so then why does she keep Moraine alive? For the first episode or 2, Lanfear may simply have other priorities, such as protecting Rand from the other Forsaken, but eventually killing Moraine should probably bubble back up on Lanfear's to-do list, especially if Moraine keeps meddling in Rand's affairs. So what then? Having some kind of temporary alliance would provide a reasonable explanation for Moraine remaining alive. Obviously that can't last forever, especially if Moraine finds out in the Rhuidean Rings that strategy leads to Lanfear killing either Moraine or Rand, which is clearly a suboptimal outcome, so at that point Moraine will have to pivot to a different strategy. There is also the issue that Rand and Moraine do not agree on what to do next. We know from 2 interviews that Rand wants to go to the Aiel Waste, whereas Moraine wants him to go to the Stone of Tyr. This is similar to a situation in The Shadow Rising, where Moraine wants Rand to march on Ilion, but Rand wants to go to the Aiel Waste. The show apparently has simply swapped the order in which the Aiel Waste events and the Stone of Tyr events take place. And we now have confirmation that in the show Calendar is indeed in the Stone of Tyr, and not in some other place. All this talk about the Stone of Tyr looks to me very much like the setup for Season 4, something I've already predicted in earlier videos. Next I'll switch to the individual storylines, starting with Nynaeve, Elaine, Matt and Min, who start out in Tar Valon and eventually make their way to Tanchico. We have 2 plot hints from episode descriptions, one from episode 5 referencing Black Arja Hunt, and one from episode 3 referencing a deadly mission. From a comment by Rafe, we know that in the show part of the Black Arja Hunt takes place in the tower. This is a bit different from the books, where the task Swan gave the girls is not to hunt the Black Arja, but to simply listen in on conversations, to identify potential Black Arja members, and then report the findings back to Swan. Rafe's comment sounds like the girls have a much more active role in the tower. It is not clear how Swan can justify this, especially considering Nynaeve's blog. The other part that is still very unclear is what information will lead the girls to Tanchico. In the books, this was the result of information planted by the Black Arja in a basement storeroom, designed to lure the girls to Tyr. That probably would not work in the show. The answer might be related to Joya. We see her here in a place that looks very much like the 13th Depository from the sneak peek. Some have suggested that Joya has been captured here, but I don't think so. She does not seem to be restrained or shielded, and the 13th Depository seems like a very unlikely place for a prison. My guess is that this scene is not happening in the main world, but in Teleran Riot, and the Black Arja is using the 13th Depository as a Teleran Riot meeting place, so Joya is probably just waiting for other Black Arja members here. I could imagine Nynaeve or Elaine surprising her here, and perhaps getting information about Tanchico from her that way. A few other odds and ends about the lead up to the Tanchico events. In 2 interviews, Rafe talked about a scene between Matt and Swan early in Season 3 that is very similar to a scene in the books, with both of them talking about the Horn of Valir. This is probably a scene from The Dragon Reborn in which Swan talks to Matt after Matt has been healed. In that scene, Matt finds out that he's linked to the Horn, and it is also the scene with Swan's line, "Will you be there when the flames are high?" This could become a great exposition and character definition scene for Matt. The other little tidbit is that in an interview with WoT Series, Rafe has now officially mentioned the Garwin-Galad fight, and since at least Garwin probably will not leave the tower this season, it now does seem like the fight will take place in the training area of the tower. Moving on to the events in Tanchico, we have a characterization of the storyline between Nynaeve, Elaine, and Matt from an interview with Rafe, in which he describes it as basically a sitcom. This makes it even more likely that we are going to get that scene from A Cup of Wine I talked about in my last video, probably in Tanchico. Also, Rafe here seems to confirm that Matt does not come after the girls, but that he stays with them, so they all probably travel to Tanchico together, as I have been expecting. We have several still images from Tanchico, and also a few scenes from the teaser and the trailer. The stills are all from episode 6, which matches my assumption that the girls travel to Tanchico in episode 5 on a seafolk vessel. None of the stills have time codes. Looking at the first image, we see Matt, Nynaeve, and Min, plus a mystery man with a hat. I'm not going to speculate about what that man appears to be selling, or whether his hat will change owners. It looks like Matt, Nynaeve, and Min are looking at something or someone to the mystery man's left. This means from our point of view behind the man. So what are they looking at? There are 2 hints. First, there's this guitar headstock, which seems to match Tom's guitar from Season 1, except it looks like the B string was strung differently, coming off the other side of the peg. It is unclear why, but it is probably unimportant. This could be due to damage to the headstock, or perhaps the crew was using 2 different guitars, one real guitar for Tom to play on, and one used as a prop. The other hint that this is Tom standing behind the man is this cluster of grey hairs we see here, that clearly could not belong to our mystery man, but it matches Tom's hair pretty well. So it looks like our group is together with Tom here. We don't know if this is their first meeting, or if they meet earlier, perhaps in Valon, and are just in a scene together here. Min's outfit in this picture is the same that we see in the storeroom scene of the teaser, and this seems to further confirm that the storeroom is in fact in Tanchico. Then we have the scene with Morgedion and Nynaeve. The way Nynaeve stares at Morgedion and holds still when Morgedion strokes her face strongly suggests that Morgedion is using compulsion here, so the scene is probably similar to one from the books, except that in the books Nynaeve and Elaine are put under compulsion. In one of the newer stills we also see Elaine, confirming that she is in Tanchico as well, and in this next still, which looks like it is part of the same scene, only from a different camera angle, we get a look at what looks like someone selling fireworks. The cart and the storefront both have a logo, that is probably the logo of the Illuminators Guild, so we're getting strong hints here that Illuminators are in Season 3. Let's for a moment go back to a scene from Season 2, when Liandrin cared for her son. Once it became clear that his name is Eludran, the immediate theory was that this means that we will not get Eludra as well, because otherwise the names would be too close. However, that theory only makes sense if we also don't get the Illuminators Guild as a whole, because if we do get the guild, then it would have made much more sense to name one of their members Eludra and use a different name for Liandrin's son. So now it looks like we are getting the Illuminators Guild, and therefore likely also Eludra, and we have to think of a different reason why Liandrin's son is named Eludran in the show. The most obvious explanation is that there is a family relationship between Eludran and Eludra, and that Eludra has been named after Eludran. With Eludran probably at least 80 years old, it would make sense for Eludra to be his granddaughter, because that way she could be about 20 to 30 years old, which is probably what the writers would want for any kind of relationship with Matt. Of course, this would also make Liandrin Eludra's great-granddaughter. I'll get back to the consequences of this in a moment. For now, let's look at this picture next. There's a lot going on here, for example the apparent elephant or shredded statue in the back, and a statue of a man wearing an Adam. Both of these hint at a connection between the city of Tanchico and the Seanchan that probably predates the Seanchan invasion in Falm by at least several decades, because the statue appears to be damaged, with the left arm partially broken off, and the ornamentation on the Adam looks worn and weathered. We don't know what that connection is, but it at least seems likely that in the show the domination band that is used on Rand later in the books will be similar in design to the Edam we saw in Season 2 in the show. What interests me most about this picture is this group of 2 men and 1 woman walking towards the left on this wooden walkway. The man in the back appears to push the woman in front of him forward, suggesting that the woman is not here out of her own free will. The most remarkable part, though, is this object that the man in front is carrying in his right hand. If this was not Wheel of Time, but any other TV show set in the present, my guess would be that this object is a handgun of some sort. The front of the barrel even seems to have a sight, similar to those found on modern handguns. But handguns in Wheel of Time? Really? Well, maybe. There are guns in the books, but only in later books, and only larger weapons, basically cannons, not handguns. But then in the books, cannons were invented by Eludra, and Eludra has another invention in the books, matches, which first appear in The Dragon Reborn. In the show, this is different. We see matches in the show as early as Season 1, Episode 1, when Tam uses a match to light a lantern. So apparently in the show, at least one of Eludra's inventions happens earlier, probably several years earlier, in order for matches to have made their way to the Two Rivers, of all places. So given that, could guns have been invented earlier too, and perhaps handguns instead of cannons? It does not seem impossible, especially considering that in our world, some of the earliest handguns invented by the Chinese were actually very similar to cannons. So what happens if only one organization has access to guns, and they keep the technical knowledge of guns a secret? It would probably change the power structure of the region. In the books, Tanchico is ruled jointly by a panarch and a king. Based on Amazon's description of Tanchico being very dangerous, and this scene of a woman apparently having been captured, my guess is that in the show, the power structure in Tanchico is different from the books. In the show, the panarch or king are likely just the heads of puppet governments, and the real power may be the Illuminators Guild, which has morphed into a mafia-like organization that uses organized crime to finance their activities, and it stays in power because it is the only group that has access to guns. So this leads to the question who the person in front of the statue is. There have been suggestions that this is Liandrin, and that the whole scene is part of a flashback. I don't think that is the case, because the flashback would have to go back at least 80 years. And if we really see guns here, then that would mean that the Illuminators have been able to keep guns a secret for over 80 years. That seems very unlikely. My guess is that this scene is set in the present, and the woman we see here may be Eludra, who is being mistreated by the Illuminators Guild, perhaps because she is refusing to cooperate further. That would be an interesting spin on a comment Liandrin made in Season 1 about how men treat little girls in much of the world. We have been assuming that Liandrin was talking about herself here and her childhood. What if that is not true, and she's actually talking about her great-granddaughter Eludra, who has gotten in trouble with the mighty Illuminators Guild and their guns, who even Liandrin as an Aes Sedai cannot confront alone? If all of this is true, then I'm curious to see how that affects Liandrin's storyline in Season 3, and also what the consequences are of Matt possibly having dealings with the great-granddaughter of Liandrin. So much about Tanchico. Next, let's look at the Two Rivers. We already know that Perrin leaves in Episode 2, and we have this scene of Loyal with hexagonal columns in the scene which match the set used for the ways. So it looks like Perrin's group travels to the Two Rivers through the ways. Then we see Perrin, Loyal, Bane and Chiad in the Two Rivers area. There is the question why everyone joins Perrin on this trip, especially considering that Perrin apparently does not anticipate any danger in the Two Rivers. He just goes there to go home, which is different from the books. For Loyal, this is easier to explain, since he probably just does Perrin a favor by taking him through the ways, and he may then just stay with Perrin out of curiosity. For Bane and Chiad, this is harder to explain. The idea that they fulfill Avienda's blood oath to him on her behalf seems strange if there's no danger involved, and if Perrin does not plan to come back at all. In that case, when and how are Bane and Chiad planning to return? The show will have to provide some answers here. Which leaves Alana, and I'll talk about her in a moment. The Episode 3 description mentions that Perrin learns the consequences of his rage. This probably refers to the rage he went into at the end of Season 2, when Hopper was killed, and Perrin then killed Jeffrey Bornhold out of rage. The fact he only now, in Episode 3, after leaving Tar Valon, finds out about the consequences of that killing, further confirms that in the show he does not know ahead of time that the White Cloaks are in the Two Rivers. This means that threat could not have been the reason for him to return to the Two Rivers. Then there's this shot of Perrin mourning among blossoming trees, which is a scene very similar to the books. However, I don't think he's mourning his family here, since they have never even been mentioned, so viewers would have no emotional connection to them. He's probably mourning Layla here. I would expect Perrin to do that very soon after arriving, probably in episode 3. This is interesting because we'll also see Alana here, and that suggests that Alana arrived in the Two Rivers very quickly, probably too quickly to travel separately on surface roads. This means she very likely was a member of Perrin's group and went through the ways with him. Otherwise, she could not be here that early. That is curious, though, because we don't see her in this shot. There are several possible explanations. Everyone is spread out a bit in this shot, so perhaps Alana is a few feet behind the others and just not in the frame. Or perhaps the scene is not from the group's arrival, but from some later mission, perhaps when they go back to close the waygate. Just like with Bane and Shiat, there is also the question why Alana decides to join Perrin, and the show will have to provide an explanation. Another interesting detail in the morning scene is Alana's facial makeup, especially the fact that it is white. White is the color of mourning in several cultures, and we have seen Alana wear white makeup after Kareni's death in Season 1. My guess why Alana is wearing this makeup now is that it is probably because Ivan has died in the fighting in Tar Valon. We also see Alana wear the same white makeup in the scene with Maxim in the Winespring Inn, which is further confirmation that Maxim survived the Tar Valon fight, as I expected. I got major déjà vu from this scene because I vividly remember modeling that window we see here in Blender for 3D printing as part of my overall Winespring Inn model. Some of you may have seen it at WotCon 2022. This room is definitely the same room in which Moraine and Lan stayed in Season 1, but after rebuilding the Winespring Inn, of course. We have a bit of a surprise in Episode 5, where, according to the episode summaries, Perrin stages a daring rescue, most likely attempting to rescue friends or family who have been taken by White Cloaks. I did not expect the show to include that storyline this season, mostly because of time constraints, but it now looks like we do get it. This would also explain this scene from the trailer, with Alana apparently channeling fog. This could be a way to hide the group's escape, and would be a parallel to the books where Varen made it rain for the same purpose. We don't have photos of Fail from early in the season, so we don't know how and when Perrin and Fail meet. Fail might already be in the Winespring Inn when Perrin arrives, but it is also possible that Fail is among the group who was captured by the White Cloaks, and that she only meets Perrin during their rescue. The advantage of this is that Perrin would have a bit more personal space early in the season, and a chance to mourn Layla without already having another possible love interest in his life. We do see Fail later in several scenes, for example here fighting with Perrin. Then there's this curious scene with Trollocs charging towards this palisade, which looks like it is the last line of defense of the village, and interestingly there are humans among them. There have been suggestions that those are Darkfriends who arrived with the Trollocs, but there's also another possible explanation for this. Those humans may have been fighting on the front line, some distance away from the palisade, and were ultimately overrun by the attacking Trollocs and are now retreating. That means they may be running back at the same time as the Trollocs are charging, but not together with them. We see White Cloaks participating in the battle here, at least a little bit, by closing the palisade gate, but we don't have enough of a tactical context here to determine if this is helpful to keep the Trollocs out, or if it is a betrayal by also keeping some of the humans out. We will have to see how that plays out. Matt is nowhere to be seen, but I'm not quite giving up yet on the idea of Matt returning to the Two Rivers. The idea of a reunion is so compelling that I still think that we will probably get that. It may happen after the fighting, though, in Episode 8. So much about the Two Rivers. Let's finally move on to the Aiel Waste storyline. In the in-story timeline, one of the first scenes will likely be this scene with Avienda on a ridge, apparently scouting ahead for Rand's group. We now have confirmation that this is actually Avienda, because Ayula Smart, the actress playing Avienda, has reposted this photo from her account. Then there's the shot from the teaser, with Moraine, Rand and Wise Ones near some tents, which is probably from the same scene as this shot from the trailer. They seem to be near an Aiel outpost. The presence of spears seems to indicate that this may be near Rhuidean, although that is not certain, because at this point we don't know what the exact significance of those spears in the sand is in the show. We might see them in more than just the Rhuidean scenes. One thing the show will have to do early, probably in episode 2 or 3, is establish the hostility of the Aiel towards outsiders, something Rosamund Pike talked about in an interview. And this has to happen before we get to Codrock's Hold, which will likely be a much more hospitable environment. This outpost we see here could also be a camp close to the border of the Aiel Waste. It is even possible that both functions are combined into a single location, if in the show Rhuidean is close to the border. Then we have this still image from episode 4. It does not have a time code, but it has to be from early in the episode, because we know that the Rhuidean event happens in this episode, and this image looks like it is from before that event. It shows the same scene we already saw in the teaser, but this time from a different camera angle, with faces visible. The big surprise here is that the person we thought was Avienda is actually Melindra. We have a casting announcement for her with a different backstory than in the books. In the show, she's a Malkiri refugee, which hints at her being paired with Lan in some way, to give the show a chance to explore Lan's ancestry a bit more, and perhaps also the relationship between the Aiel and the Malkiri, for example the origin of Lan's title Annaline. Daniel Henney, the actor playing Lan, suggested in an interview that there are characters that come up that sort of prompt Lan's thoughts about his past and possibly returning to Malkir. Since the person we thought was Avienda is actually Melindra, it now seems that Avienda is not in this scene. That's curious because we know that Avienda does actually go to Rhuidean in the show. More about that in a minute. So where is she? Maybe scouting ahead again, towards the city. It is also possible that the scene with everyone looking down on Rhuidean is not the scene from which the actual Rhuidean event starts for everyone, but an earlier scene in episode 4. There's one person on the right who might be Egwene, but it is not quite conclusive. Egwene might also be at Kodrok's Hold at this time. One other piece of information we have from an interview is that we will get a new Shadow Spawn this season, and that it will not be a Drakkar. In that interview, it is Yosha who suggests that we are getting other creatures, so those creatures will probably show up in Rand's story arc in the Aiel Waste, and are probably Darkhounds. Since we know that episodes 5 and 7 will heavily feature the two rivers, it seems very likely that episode 6 will be another Aiel Waste episode, and since it is titled Shadow in the Night, if we put all of this information together, it seems even more likely that one of my earlier predictions is correct, and that we will get a Shadow Spawn attack that includes Darkhounds on Kodrok's Hold in episode 6. Staying in the Aiel Waste, I'll next look at a few more character-related points, first for Avienda. We see her here suspended in the Rhuidean rings. The hairstyle makes it clear that this definitely is Avienda. We also have her here walking almost in lockstep with Moraine, probably towards the rings. To me, the most interesting scene is Avienda using fiery spears, apparently in Kodrok's Hold. On one hand, this seems to confirm her Wise One story arc, but on the other hand, it creates a bit of a deviation from the books, because in the books, maidens who enter Wise One training have to destroy their spears and are afterwards not allowed to touch spears again. In the show, it instead looks like spears may be integrated into their fighting styles, even after becoming Wise Ones, which I think is visually probably more interesting. Then we have Rand. We have him here in a scene that then cuts to an arm with a dragon banner. But this is a bit of a misdirect in the trailer. The dragon banner is not on Rand's arm, but on Ruark's arm, and Ruark is just showing the banner to Rand, as we can tell from the way Ruark is dressed. Some people have complained that the dragon banner does not look exactly like in the books, and does not extend down onto the back of his hand, but this was likely done for production reasons. Rand will keep his banner throughout the remaining seasons, so having to apply makeup to his hand for every single scene would have been an unnecessary complication. Placing the banner higher up on his forearm makes sense, because then it can be hidden by long sleeves and only has to be applied to his arm in scenes in which it is important and shown to the viewers. We see Rand in front of the glass columns, with another character ahead of him, probably Moradin, if the show keeps that part of the storyline identical to the books. I'm not going to go through every Age of Legends scene of Rand's Rhuidean event. Only one point. In the voiceover in the trailer, we are told that each step forward is a step backwards through time. This suggests that the show does present the Rhuidean scenes in reverse order, not chronologically as I thought, but this means that the last scene we see, the one that needs to have the biggest impact on Rand, has to be the chronologically earliest scene. My guess is that this is the Sharom exploding, and in this shot with Lanfear we may see the column down in the background. The scene with Egwene asking Rand, "Do you love her?" is probably about Lanfear, and most likely happens in episode 5, when, according to the episode description, Egwene learns Rand's dark secret. We don't see much more of Egwene, but there is this one scene of Egwene talking about the tower destroying itself from the inside. It has been suggested that Egwene has come out of the arches of her acceptor test here, but I don't think so. She should be wearing her shift then, but that has thin shoulder straps and looks very different from what she's wearing here. I think in this scene, Egwene is talking about the fallout from Elida's coup, probably through Nynaeve and Elaine in Teleron Riot. This means it is from the second half of the season. Finally, let's go to Moraine. I've already discussed most of her Season 3 story arc in previous videos, so just a few updates. We see her suspended in the Rhuidean rings here, no real surprise. Then we have her in what seems to be a sweat tent, and we even have what looks like a Gaishain in the background. The most mysterious image is the still from episode 8, with Moraine using her sphere, and from the way she's holding it, it looks like she's pointing it at someone or something. This means it might be used as a weapon. There have been suggestions that the sphere may be a sangreal, but I don't think so for two reasons. First of all, we already had a sangreal introduced in episode 8 during season 1, and this may happen again in season 4 with Calendor, so having it happen again in season 3 seems too repetitive to me. The show cannot use sangreals as the solution to problems in almost every season. The other reason is a comment made by Rosamund in an interview where she called the object mysterious and exciting and problematic. Exciting may describe sangreals, but mysterious and problematic do not really fit. I think this object is actually a terangreal, but it is not quite clear what it does. It may be related to her visions, as I have suggested in an earlier video. The other possibility is that it produces balefire. As mentioned earlier, we are very likely getting Darkhounds in the Aiel Waste this season, and in the books Darkhounds were introduced in The Dragon Reborn primarily as a justification for using balefire. The show may do the same thing here. That leaves the question of what is actually happening in this episode 8 scene with the orb. It is interesting that Moraine wears the same clothing here as in one of her visions, in which Lanfear apparently kills her. That suggests that this episode 8 scene may be a confrontation with Lanfear that is somehow related to that vision. That is definitely a possibility. The only problem with that theory is that most likely none of the two women will die, so the scene may be a bit anticlimactic in its outcome. Moraine won't die because of the many hints we have had that she will go back to the White Tower. In addition to the hints from my last videos, I will provide 2 more hints in just a minute. Lanfear won't die either. She is such a compelling villain, especially with her past connection to Lews Therin, and now the show is setting up a deeper relationship with Rand. I expect that to continue for at least 1 more season, if not longer. If we do get some kind of confrontation between Moraine and Lanfear in episode 8, then it will probably be used to re-establish just how much more powerful and capable Lanfear is compared to Moraine, and how Lanfear has been manipulating Moraine all through seasons 2 and 3. This would raise the stakes for future seasons. I released a video after season 2 aired that discusses Lanfear's likely hidden plots during season 2, and we may find out about some of them during this confrontation. It is also possible that there won't be a confrontation in episode 8, and that this image is from a flashback montage that goes back to episode 4, in which we find out more information about some of Moraine's visions in the rings. This would be similar to what happened in season 1, when at the end of episode 7 we got a flashback montage of earlier events in season 1, with the reveal that Rand is the Dragon Reborn. In the end, it does not really matter how the show presents this information, because I expect the outcome to be the same. Lanfear and Moraine will both survive. Moraine will go back to the White Tower, and Lanfear will appear to be even more dangerous and powerful than we have known until that point. Finally, let me give you 2 more reasons why Moraine is likely to leave Rand and go to the White Tower at the end of season 3. First, in an interview, Yosha talked about the goodbye scene between Moraine and Rand. I don't think this is Moraine just heading out to confront Lanfear. Moraine would have to tell Rand where she's going, and for Rand to be okay with this, it would have to be something Rand wants Moraine to do. Trying to kill the person Rand is in love with would not work here. However, leaving Rand permanently, accepting his independence, and going back to the White Tower would work quite well to set up a goodbye scene. Second, there's this scene from season 1, episode 7 that I had almost forgotten about until I saw it in a rewatch. Min has a vision here that the Amyrlin in full regalia will be Moraine's downfall. This apparently has not happened yet, and based on the situation at the beginning of season 3, this now strongly hints at a confrontation between Elaida and Moraine after the coup. We're coming to the end of this video. With the release of season 3 imminent, I don't expect to release any more updates to season 3 predictions. I hope you enjoyed the video, and please let me know in comments where you agree or disagree. Thanks for watching, and that's it for now.